nothing in your hand.
Step out. Hey, come towards me, hands up. Keep coming. To your left. To your left. Keep coming.
All right, watch your step.
Is there a reason though for
Yeah, we'll explain it to you in a little bit. We're going to clear the house.
That is dJahard Colon, 22 years old, Westlake, Ohio. Roughly 13 hours after he beat his 25-year-old girlfriend unconscious in a bar parking lot, left her lying in the road with life-threatening injuries, walked home, and went to sleep. He came out cooperating, calm, polite, even thank you, before he even knew what he was being detained for. He had no idea how much they already knew. When Westlake detectives began piecing together the night, what they found was not a single act of drunken rage. It was the endpoint of a relationship defined by fear. Her family had been warning anyone who would listen for months. The boyfriend had been sending threatening messages from her own phone, threatening to kill her sister, threatening to be persistent, threatening to never stop. She had just come out of a week in detox. She had tried to get away. She went right back. What investigators recovered from Colon's apartment told the story he initially refused to. Bloody shorts, blood-stained bedsheets, physical evidence on his own body, bruised hands, injuries to his foot and elbow. And then, in a Westlake police interrogation room, the confession came in fragments. We fought, and I know I did hit her. I know I fucked up. The grand jury didn't just charge felonious assault. They charged attempted murder, 2 counts of strangulation, domestic violence, 5 charges in total for what he did to a woman who had trusted him, returned to him, and been left for dead by him on a residential street in the middle of the night. He eventually pleaded guilty to 1 count of felonious assault, a second-degree felony under Ohio law, and was sentenced to 60 days in county jail and 2 years of probation. The victim's name was never publicly released. Have you ever watched someone you love walk back into a situation you knew was going to destroy them and felt completely powerless to stop it? Subscribe if you want to see accountability stories like this every week. dJahard Colon grew up in Brooklyn, New York. He has said he moved to Ohio at around the age of 16, raised largely by his grandmother, not his parents. He told detectives his grandmother had legal custody of him. The family home he left behind in Brooklyn was the kind of neighborhood, he'd later tell a police investigator, that he had actively chosen to move away from. I came from New York, Brooklyn, he said. I don't want to live in the hood no more. That detail, a young man who relocated to the suburbs with his grandmother, who wanted something different, matters. Because the version of dJahard Colon who arrived in Westlake, Ohio as a teenager was not yet the man who would stand in a courtroom 3 years later and listen to a judge tell him he had no right to put his hands on anyone. He was just a kid from Brooklyn trying to build something quieter. He got a job in a kitchen. He talked about people he knew who had struggled with addiction and gotten clean. He described himself, even during the worst night of his life, as someone who didn't like drugs, who hated watching people close to him struggle with them. He was 22 when the incident happened. By that point, he had accumulated a criminal history that Westlake police would later describe as involving alcohol, weapons, and prior domestic offenses. He was on probation at the time of the attack. He knew, on some level, that he was already walking a line. When detectives sat down with him later that morning, he would casually mention that he wasn't supposed to be drinking. He knew his terms, knew the restrictions, but had been stressed and decided to anyway. He had been dating the victim for about a year. Good, he told detectives when they asked how their relationship had been. I love her. Domestic violence does not announce itself. It does not begin with a fist. It begins with small acts of control. A message here, an accusation there, the slow construction of a world in which the victim has fewer and fewer exits. By the time the violence is visible, the person on the inside has usually been there so long that leaving feels more dangerous than staying. In this case, there was a second layer of vulnerability that made everything harder. The victim was a recovering addict. Addiction and domestic abuse intersect in predictable and devastating ways. The substance becomes both a source of conflict and a tool of control. The partner's instability is always partially blamed on the addiction. The addict, trying to get clean, often finds that sobriety means confronting the relationship, and that prospect can feel more overwhelming than the substance itself. The victim's family saw all of this clearly. Her sister had been telling her for months. She had sought treatment. She had done the work. She had completed a full week in a detox facility the week before she was found in that road. The system that exists to help people in her position, detox, recovery, the transition back to daily life, did everything it was supposed to do. It gave her a week of distance. It gave her a window. The window lasted 4 days. She got out on a Saturday. By Monday, she was back at his apartment. The system was built on the assumption that the person she returned to would not be waiting. It did not account for dJahard Colon. Abusers do not arrive in a relationship already identified as dangerous. They are charming. They are present. They offer something. In this case, he offered care, or what looked like it. He spoke about her addiction with apparent concern. He told detectives he had tried to keep her from driving drunk. He described holding her up, walking her home, not wanting her to get hurt. He positioned himself, even in the middle of his own confession, as someone who had been looking out for her. That framing, the protective partner, the man who loved her despite the chaos her addiction caused, is precisely the frame that makes it hard for the people around a victim to intervene, and hard for the victim herself to leave. He had been using her phone to send death threats to her sister. He had a documented history of domestic violence. The family had been warning her for months. And still, on a Tuesday night in late April 2025, she was at the Time Warp bar with him, drinking, with a coworker of his named Sean, who would eventually take an Uber and disappear before the worst of it happened. Trust, in this case, had not been earned. It had been manufactured over 12 months of alternating pressure and affection, the standard architecture of a coercive relationship. The violence that put her in the road that night was not, by any measure, the first time dJahard Colon had been physical with her. When detectives in the interrogation room asked him directly whether they had ever physically fought before, he was candid. "She punched me a couple times," he said. "I had never punched her. I called her, grabbed her, but we never really fought before." That admission, framed as minimization, as a distinction between grabbing and punching, is itself the confession. He had grabbed her before. He had called her names before. He had been escalating before any of this. The family knew it. Her sister knew it. The threats on the phone were not an aberration. They were the pattern, louder. What changed on April 23rd was the setting. A parking lot, late at night, enough alcohol in both of them that he would later claim not to remember the number of times he struck her. The restraint that had kept it at grabbing and threatening snapped, and when he walked away from what he had done, he left her lying on the asphalt with life-threatening injuries and went home. The week before the attack, the victim had been in detox, Saturday to Friday, 7 days away from him, away from the drinking, away from the cycle. Her family had seen it as a genuine attempt at a break, not just from the substance, but from him. She got out on a Saturday. She went straight back. On Monday, Colon picked up her phone and sent a message to her sister. He told her he was going to kill her. He said he wasn't going to leave her or her sister alone. Her sister told detectives she had worked alongside him for 2 years before leaving that job specifically because the threats had become unrelenting. "I had them written up at work, and I had to get a new job because they would not stop threatening me," the sister said, standing in the street at 3 in the morning, telling an officer the history she had been carrying for months. By Tuesday night, the victim was at the Time Warp bar on Center Ridge Road, the bar closest to the apartment on Center Ridge where Colon lived. She was there with him and his coworker Sean. She was drinking. She had just left detox 4 days prior. By any observable measure, the situation was already deteriorating. The coworker would eventually take an Uber home. Colon would later say he had been trying to get her to walk back with him, to keep her from driving drunk. What happened in that parking lot in the minutes that followed is what the physical evidence would tell the story of, because Colon, at least initially, claimed he could not remember. Stories like this one rarely get the national attention they deserve. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a case. She was 25 years old, a working woman with a car, a family, a sister who loved her fiercely enough to leave her own job rather than keep working beside the man who was hurting her. A woman who had been fighting addiction, not losing to it, fighting it, who had checked herself into detox and done a full week. A woman who, by her family's account, was not without self-awareness. She knew the relationship was dangerous. She knew what her sister thought. She went back anyway, the way people in the grip of a coercive relationship almost always do. Not because they are weak, but because leaving is its own kind of terrifying architecture. What she looked like when officers found her at the intersection of Canterbury and Center Ridge Roads at 2:30 in the morning is not something that was officially described in detail. Westlake Police Captain Gerald Vogel, the department's public face on the case, was explicit about why. "We wouldn't release pictures of the victim," he said, "but if you saw pictures of the victim, you'd be quite alarmed and shocked at the way she looked." She had been beaten in a parking lot. She had been strangled. That charge appeared twice in the grand jury indictment, and she had been left there, not carried somewhere, not called for help for, left. Her car was found in the bar's parking lot. She had somehow ended up in the road, sitting upright with her legs crossed when the first witness spotted her, according to that witness's account to arriving officers. She couldn't stand. She could barely speak. She gave one officer her first name and her social security number, and that was the totality of what she could communicate. She survived. She was treated at UH St. John Medical Center. Her name was never made public. Her sister stood in the middle of a Westlake street at 3 a.m. and gave officers the entire history in one breath. The detox, the threats, the Tuesday nights, the 2 years of working alongside him, the job she had left, the warnings nobody had been able to make stick. 2 days before this night, she said, the threats had come again. And now we're here with her, and she's been there for days. The investigation cracked open before sunrise. Officers arriving at the scene had almost nothing to work with. A woman who could not speak, no immediate witnesses to the assault itself, and a crime scene that was the middle of a public road rather than a controlled location. What they had was detective work, technology, and the bar. They knew her car was in the parking lot of the Time Warp Bar on Center Ridge Road. That placed her there earlier in the night. Witness interviews, including the man who had stopped his car with his hazard lights on to protect her from oncoming traffic while he called 911, confirmed she had been in the road for some time before police arrived. The combination of surveillance footage from the area, physical evidence, and witness interviews narrowed the persons of interest quickly. Within hours of the assault, detectives had a location and a name. The second person of interest, the coworker, Sean, was located and interviewed. He cooperated. He was eliminated. That left one person. Westlake Police Captain Gerald Vogel led the response as the department's point of contact on the investigation. What his detectives pulled together in the hours after the assault was a tight, multi-sourced case. Evidence from the scene placed the assault in the parking lot adjacent to the bar, not at the residence on Center Ridge Road, meaning it had happened during the walk, or the argument that became a walk, between the bar and the apartment. The timeline fit. The search warrant executed by SWAT at the Center Ridge Road residence that afternoon recovered what detectives needed. In the apartment, officers found blood-stained shorts. They found blood on the bed sheets. They photographed the apartment room by room. A drone was deployed to clear the third floor. And when they had Kalan sitting in the Westlake police station, hands cuffed, injuries visible on his own body, the conversation that followed would produce the evidence the prosecution needed without requiring a single piece of forensic testimony. He talked at length. He explained the night in sequence, described the bar, named the coworker, described the multiple times they had fallen while he was trying to walk her home. He constructed a story in which she was simply too drunk, in which the falls were accidental, in which he had gone home without realizing how serious it was. And then, as the detective calmly dismantled the logic of it, the story unraveled from the inside. "You're definitely irritated, I would imagine, for sure," the detective said. "And then now, we don't remember. I mean, if it came to the point where you lost your cool..." A pause, then. "I probably did. I'm not gonna lie." Now you know what that clip was. The timestamp on the body camera reads 15:49, 3:45 in the afternoon, 13 hours after she was found in the road. The SWAT team had spent the morning building the case. Surveillance footage from around the Time Warp Bar. Witness interviews. The woman's sister standing on Canterbury Road at 3 a.m. giving officers the entire history of this relationship in one breath. And then, with enough in hand to execute a search warrant, they came for him. He came out the back door of the Center Ridge Road apartment exactly as instructed, hands raised, shirtless, moving toward the officers, cooperative, calm. "Thank you," he said as they put his hands behind his back. "What is this about?" He asked about the kids in the building. He mentioned his dog, an old Yorkie who wouldn't bite. He answered every question with the unhurried fluency of a man who had already decided what story he was going to tell. Inside the apartment, officers moved from room to room. One of them came across the shorts. "Hey, Steve, we found the bloody shorts." A paper bag was retrieved. Then, "I found his sheets that have blood on it." The apartment was fully cleared. In the interrogation room that followed, Colin sat across from a detective and spoke for nearly 40 minutes. He described the coworker. He described the bar. He described the falling. He described waking up that morning sore and confused, his foot swollen, his elbows scraped. He noted, with apparent sincerity, that he didn't like seeing people get high, that his mother had struggled with it, his aunt had struggled with it, that he wanted better for the woman he had been dating. And then the detective asked the one question that reordered everything. "When you pushed her and you kept pushing her..." "That's where I fed up," Colin said. "That's where I fed up. I fed up. I fed up." The detective's voice was steady. "You left her to die." A long silence. "I did that," Colin said. "Yep, you did that. And you walked away and you left." On the table in front of him, his phone lay face down. The screen had gone dark. The Cuyahoga County grand jury returned a 5-count indictment against dJahard Colon. He was charged with attempted murder, the most serious count, carrying a potential maximum sentence of 11 years in Ohio. Along with felonious assault under Ohio Revised Code Section 2903.11, a second-degree felony carrying a maximum of 8 years. The indictment also included 2 separate counts of strangulation under ORC Section 2903.18 and 1 count of domestic violence. At his arraignment in Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court, Colon pleaded not guilty to all charges. A no-contact order was issued immediately, along with a temporary protection order. His original bond had been set at $1 million at Rocky River Municipal Court the day of his arrest. At the Common Pleas arraignment, it was continued at $50,000. Separately, at his initial Rocky River appearance, the judge found him guilty of a probation violation. The drinking alone constituted a breach, and sentenced him to 30 additional days. The case did not go to trial. In October 2025, dJahard Colon, now 23, appeared in Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court and entered a guilty plea to a single count of felonious assault, the second-degree felony. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors dismissed the attempted murder charge, both strangulation counts and the domestic violence count. The state was not satisfied with what the plea deal offered. Prosecutor David Meredith stood before Judge Holly Gallagher and pushed for a sentence above the minimum. The defendant admitted to attacking the victim, he told the court. The defendant admitted to leaving the victim. He was right on both counts. Colon had admitted exactly that, on camera, at the Westlake police station in the hours after the assault. The interrogation footage had been shared publicly by Captain Vogel, an unusual step that underscored the department's confidence in the evidence and their awareness of the case's significance. Colon spoke at sentencing. He apologized. He told the court it was time for him to grow up. "It just affected me heavy," he said. "That's not me. I can't live like that no more. I don't want to live like that no more." The judge was not moved by the framing. Judge Holly Gallagher looked at dJahard Colon across the bench of Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court on October 29, 2025. Her words were short and direct. "You have no right to put your hands on anybody ever," she said. "That's unacceptable behavior." There was no lengthy philosophical meditation on what had gone wrong, no extended address to the gallery. The facts had already spoken at sufficient length. The sentence handed down was 60 days in county jail and 2 years of probation. Given that felonious assault in the second degree carries a maximum of 8 years in Ohio State Prison, 60 days represented the lowest tier of consequence the court could impose. Colon had already served time on the probation violation. He would serve his 60 days and be released into 2 years of supervised probation. The attempted murder charge, the one that reflected what a grown man does when he beats a 25-year-old woman unconscious and leaves her lying in a road in the dark, was gone, dropped, as part of the deal. The victim was not named in court. She was not publicly identified at any point in the proceedings. The woman at the center of this case survived. Beyond that, the public record falls quiet. Her name was protected throughout the investigation, the indictment, the plea, and the sentencing. She was 25 years old when this happened. She had just come out of detox. What her recovery looked like in the months that followed, physical, psychological, in terms of sobriety, is not a matter of public record, which is as it should be. What is on the record is the pattern that put her in that road. A man with a documented history of domestic violence, weapons offenses, and alcohol-related criminal conduct. A woman in recovery from addiction returned to a coercive relationship within days of completing treatment. A family that had been sounding the alarm for months and was not in a position to force a different outcome. The coercive control legal framework, which would allow prosecutors to charge the pattern of behavior, not just the single violent event, is not currently part of Ohio criminal statute in a form that would have changed how this case was charged. It was charged on what could be proven, what he did to her body on that night in that parking lot. dJahard Colon pleaded guilty to 1 felony count. He served 60 days in county jail. He is currently serving 2 years of probation. Somewhere in Westlake, Ohio, a woman with a name nobody has published is living with what he did to her. Her sister, who had warned everybody and had been threatened herself, stood in the middle of Canterbury Road at 3 in the morning and gave the arriving officers the whole history in one breath. 2 days before the attack, she had told her, "Listen, you either need to leave our house or you need to stay there or you need to figure something out because if it's dangerous, this is not okay." 2 days later, this is what happened. This story got local news coverage. It deserved a great deal more. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. These cases exist all over the country, and the only way they get seen is if we keep watching.